Pathis has got one. I think this is the first time we've ever played anything from his channel. But continuing on in a similar vein, asking the question, what is happening to Japan's convenience stores? If you know anything about konbini in Japan, they are like these little slices of heaven on every corner in Japan. But at least they used to be. They seem to be changing, some of them not for the better. Let's take a look.
This is the Gaijin Mart, the most notorious convenience store in all of Japan.
I guess that's a family mart near Kabukicho or something like that. Or maybe in Shinjuku? Fairly certain you'll find nothing but gringo markups there, or Gaijin markups as the case may be. Yeah, chat, try to avoid these places. These are obvious tourist traps if you go to Japan. Go into the Daily Yamazaki or Mini Stop or the Family Mart or 7-Eleven that's off the beaten path. Go where the locals go, because that's where you get the best deals on anything. And that's not just in Japan, that's no matter where you go in the world.
This store has become famous among tourists as a 24/7 open-air bar in the middle of Tokyo.
Yeah, this looks like... No, this is Shibuya, I think. This looks like Shibuya. Possibly near the Scramble Crossing. But yeah, chat, you want to be a good tourist in Japan, don't do what we just saw. Don't buy copious amounts of alcoholic beverages and then proceed to chug them out in front of the konbini you just bought them in. It's not only incredibly uncouth behavior or the behavior of Philistines. That's not what it's there for. It's not an open-air bar. It's a konbini where people go to find items they need for their convenience. Hence the term convenience store or konbini. Go in, buy your products, buy your booze, take it back, and fuck off back to your hotel. Consume it there. Never even heard of a Gaijin Mart. Must be new. Don't do what Donnie Don't does. That's anywhere, though. That's wino behavior. It really is. That's the behavior of just absolute alcoholics. You know, you buy a fuck ton of booze from a konbini and then step outside the main door and proceed to chug it down to get as piss drunk as you possibly can fast. I mean, there's the possibility you might get arrested for public intoxication by the local police. Maybe, maybe not. But yes, that is just, you probably have a drinking problem at that point. And you need to get help. This is not a place for you to behave like stereotypical British tourists where you just get absolutely piss drunk in public and behave like a fucking animal. You engage in that sort of behavior, you don't really deserve to go on holiday anywhere in the world.
However, to the local Japanese people, it is a breeding ground for nuisance foreigners where tourists go for a drink or two.
Also unacceptable, dumping your trash out like that. Keep it in a bag and chuck it away at your hotel. Or even they have large receptacles at the konbinis. You can dispose of your rubbish there. This is also unacceptable.
And then end their night acting up like Johnny Somali.
But what's happening back?
Yeah, if you start acting like Johnny Somali, you deserve to be publicly flogged by police, then arrested, then publicly flogged in prison, and do serious prison time where you are daily flogged.
There in the Gaijin Mart is only a part of the problem because the convenience store crisis goes much deeper than that.
If you have been traveling in Japan recently, you might have noticed that many of the convenience stores today are filled with foreign workers, and on top of that,
yeah, they're importing a lot of foreign workers from places like India A lot of them don't really speak Japanese. Some of them don't even speak proper English. It's becoming an issue. By the way, fun fact about Japanese prisons, if you don't keep your cell clean, they make you do that one sitting punishment that cuts off circulation to your legs. Now, they don't fuck around with Japanese prisons. I'm told that those who are awaiting the death penalty, they are not informed when they will be executed. So they are just basically living in constant fear, like every day could be their last day. They do not fuck around with Japanese prisons. So do not do anything to get yourself arrested over in Japan. You are not going to have a good time.
Prices of everyday items are rising higher than ever before. So you might be asking yourself, why are things...
That's one good thing about Konbini is that they've got fairly decent quality booze available at somewhat cheap prices. I think it's Suntory, I want to say it's Kabuki. It's a gold label Suntory. It's fairly basic, but it's still good. Nothing fancy, but it's good.
Suddenly changing. What is happening to Japanese convenience stores? Well, the truth is, konbini, as we know them, are about to disappear.
There you go. What?
Convenience stores today are one of the most famous aspects of Japan, as anyone who travels here is guaranteed to find themselves in one many times, and even if you haven't traveled here yet, I'm sure you've at least seen vloggers online talk about konbini sandwiches like they're the pinnacle of Japanese cuisine.
I mean, they are pretty fucking good. I know both times that I was in Japan, on the day, at least once a day, I was stopping into a konbini to grab a quick bite to eat. Whether it be breakfast on the run, lunch, dinner, maybe a snack. Or yeah, even to just grab a beer or even a whiskey highball, which they do have those in a can over in Japan, and they're decent. They're not bad.
Now, even though these things are good for what they are, I've always felt that people might be giving a bit too much credit for some white bread and industrial mayonnaise, but maybe that's just me.
The first convenience store in Japan opened its doors in 1974 when the country was in the middle of its economic miracle.
7-Eleven. Fun fact, chat. 7-Eleven opens in Japan. It's almost an entity unto it becomes almost an entity unto itself. Eventually opens its own bank, 7 Bank. The American parent runs into financial problems, I think sometime in the 90s or 2000s. It gets so bad that their Japanese subsidiary ends up bailing them out. And it turned out to be the best thing in the world for 7-Eleven, because now 7-Eleven in the US and other parts of the world are starting to take on characteristics that were once only found with Japanese 7-Elevens. That's wild, it is. Need to save up and get me some Suntory again. It's good stuff. I need to save up and get me another... I should save up and get myself another bottle again. Maybe a nice bottle of Nika. They're just so bloody expensive these days.
Since, as people were getting richer, they started to be more willing to pay a little extra for some convenience. It didn't take long for the konbini to take over the country, and soon they stopped being just stores and became an important part of every Japanese person's daily life. Today, it's hard to find things you cannot do in the konbini, and to many people, they're the place keeping your life together, as I myself, for example, used to pay my rent in the konbini for years.
Yeah, you can pay your rent, you can pay your utility bills. You can do a lot with a Japanese konbini. And combine that with the fact that you can oftentimes pay for items like that with a transit card, like a Suica card or Passmo, it's even more convenient.
But the thing with these convenience stores is that no matter how amazing they are, they were originally in the 70s designed for the young, growing, strong Japan, and they simply cannot survive the modern challenges the country is facing.
頭覚えて言ってることなんで頭入れて
Japanese society
Yeah, people like him need to be deported.
as we know it is on the brink of a collapse, and its effects are affecting the people in the convenience stores more and more each day. Because of this, the
Modern challenges equals parasites, yes.
stores themselves have no other option but to adapt to the changing environment. But before we visit the AI automated conveni of the future,
Oh, yes. I was seeing this. They did an updated version of their theme on Konbini on NHK World. There's a program called Japanology Plus. Started out as Weekend Japanology, then Begin Japanology. And now they've done, I think this is like their third or fourth edition of the theme on Konbini. One of the things that they're talking about here is these automated terminals. But notice off to the left, chat, you've got this sort of 3D cel-shaded anime avatar. There's an actual person behind that. An actual person who is working remotely from their home to assist anyone if they've got questions or if they, need help with something. So, in effect, konbinis are now employing the use of Vtubers as cashiers. I kid you not, chat. They are using Vtubers as employees. So, if nothing else, his lordship might have a future as a Vtuber cashier.
that is supposed to be the answer to all of these problems,
That's funny and an opportunity. Maybe the future is now.
we have to find out exactly what is happening to the konbini today. The old 24-hour model we all know was built on a very specific assumption that there would always be an endless supply of young people willing to work the late night shifts for minimum wage. But as Japan's population has started to shrink aggressively, now there will never be enough young Japanese workers to run these stores ever again. This is the reason behind why most convenience stores today are filled with foreign workers, as the industry is frantically trying to plug the holes in this sinking ship by importing cheap labor from countries such as China, India, and Nepal.
Especially here in the middle of Tokyo, where there's a konbini around every corner.
I can understand possibly importing people from China, Vietnam, maybe Nepal. From your neighbors, maybe. I know that, unlike in America, a lot of Vietnamese have had tremendous difficulty adapting and integrating into Japanese society. So there have been some issues with that. India, on the other hand, that can only end in unmitigated disaster. Mars, welcome in. Base, what do I apply? I know, right? I think as we've seen with so many foreigners from India in other Western countries, it just has not worked. Because there is that whole thing about izzat in their culture. People like that don't act in good faith. And so I don't know if there's going to be a peaceful integration of Indians into Japanese society. We're already starting to see the cracks in that whole thing in the United States and in other countries. Honestly, it's a mistake to let people in from India. I don't think that's going to work very well. I have my doubts about Nepal. China? Maybe. Maybe. There is that whole thing about just... They tend to become a very vindictive lot when it suits them about old grievances that have already been litigated and relitigated a million times concerning World War II. But the people are similar enough that they might be able to make it work. So China, yeah, maybe. Nepal, possibly. India, no. Not going to work. It's just not going to work.
It's practically impossible to find a store without foreign workers.
With the sudden influx of cheap foreign labor, experiencing that great customer service Japan has historically been famous for is slowly starting to be a thing of the past. Since to many of the migrant workers, entry-level jobs like this aren't anything serious or a part of their career path, but simply a way to get their hands on a visa.
Yeah, they want to get their hands on a visa. They're looking for some easy cash. And I honestly have to wonder if there's any real requirement by these companies for them to learn Japanese, or if they're all just looking the other way and just saying, yeah, no, we'll give you some classes, we'll give you some reading material for you to study, and then they never do.
However, it's hard to solely blame them for the death of omotenashi, the Japanese tradition of hospitality, since I don't think many of us would have the energy to keep appearances up when there's 100 tourists right outside your store treating it like it's an open bar and climbing on the roof for some TikTok views. This kind of behavior.
Chat, this is monumentally stupid and dangerous. And if you do this, you are begging to fall to your death. And frankly, you sort of deserve it at this point. You'd think knowing the language would be the most minimal requirement. You would think. But then again, we've said that about a lot of foreigners coming into places like the United Kingdom, the United States, and Western European countries of, at least have some sort of working knowledge of English. And we can't even get that out of people. And then, of course, you've got shitlibs that say it's racist for us to demand that they speak and communicate in English. Do a flip, win your Darwin Award. Right?
That many tourists and even many Japanese people have been bringing to Tokyo's downtown areas has made most of the stores to stop providing people with basic amenities such as trash cans and toilets simply because the drunken people aren't willing to behave themselves.
Yeah, you act like that, chat, in a society that is very conservative and reserved, like Japan is. You don't deserve to be there. All those people deserve to be arrested and either thrown in jail or tossed on the next plane back home to wherever the fuck they came from. They are ruining Japan for the rest of us. That is no way to behave.
The overworked and underpaid migrant workers who already don't care about their jobs to begin with aren't going to stay extra hours every day cleaning up the mess these people leave behind, which is why for the workers it is simply much easier to ban customers from using the restrooms and make the convenience stores a little less convenient for the sake of their own sanity.
Before long, I would not be surprised if they end up closing these konbini locations in these big tourist areas. Because ultimately, all these other conveniences they take away, I don't think it's going to deter them as much as they think. Ultimately, these locations are going to be closed down, just because they've already started on the negative cycle downwards of taking away things that people have come to expect in a konbini. So other people are just going to go to other locations. That's just going to drive the numbers down for these particular locations to the point that I think they're just going to close down. The parent companies are going to look at these, like this Family Mart location, say, you know what? It's not worth it to be here anymore. Rent's too expensive, and not enough people are shopping here. It's just more trouble than it's worth. Let's just close it down. Which would be really sad. It would be really sad. But this is what happens when you just let any fucking Dick, Tom, or Harry into your country to do what the fuck ever, just because you want their tourist dollars.
In fact, the situation around Gaijin Mart got so bad that last year the government banned drinking outside here in Shibuya completely.
Today, if you try
Shibuya,
drinking
knew it.
outside and get caught by one of the many officers patrolling around Shibuya, even though they aren't legally allowed to give you a ticket, they will immediately and aggressively take your drinks away and tell you to take a hike.
You know, it's easy to look at places like the Gaijin Mart
That may change eventually. It's because of that sort of behavior that they might eventually be given the power to start ticketing people, maybe even jailing them. I know a lot of Americans have this sort of understanding that, yeah, public intoxication is illegal in most places. In Japan, you've got people who freely stroll about most places with a beer in hand or hard liquor or something like that. And no one would bat an eye. Same in a lot of European countries, because so many places don't have that sort of hang-up about alcohol. That could change, though, with Japan. If enough people refuse to stop acting like absolute fuckwits, then yeah, you're going to get situations where public consumption of alcohol is banned.
and think, oh, it's the tourists ruining Japan, or it's the foreign workers not doing their job. And even though a narrative like that might get a lot of views on YouTube, the truth is that those are actually just surface level issues. Because the real secret that the big corporations don't want you to know is that the whole convenience industry has been completely rigged from the beginning.
It turns out that every
Right.
individual convenience store in Japan is actually franchised, meaning they're owned by a private individual who then pays for the license to use.
Well, that's not too unusual. Most of the convenience stores in the United States, I mean, most of the 7-Elevens in the United States are individual franchises.
The name. But the catch in all of this is that the price of that license is insane. To use the brand name, these big chains often take up to 2/3 of the profit, leaving the individual store owners with only the remaining 30%.
Yeah, there's plenty of abuses of franchisees, depending on which one you go with. There's a reason you'll see growth in certain particular franchises, then popping up in more locations. Probably because franchisees took a look at the terms and realized there's more money to be made in those particular ones.
From this remaining 30%, the owners then have to pay for everything. The staff, the electricity, and the rent. Meaning, if the minimum wage goes up, which it has, or the price of electricity skyrockets, the big guys don't lose a cent, and every single yen of that extra cost comes straight out of the owner's pocket. Pretty much any way you slice it, the convenience business is almost risk-free to these huge corporations, and the only ones who have to risk anything are the little guys who buy the license from them. And because they have nothing to lose, they can open new stores wherever they want, even right next door to another convenience, forcing their own franchisees to compete against each other.
Yeah, there's one in America that I knew in particular that they had a very predatory model, and I think they still do. It's a barbecue franchise, and former franchisees had noted that the terms of the franchise agreement were so onerous, and everything is rather sneakily cost prohibitive by nature, but it is a model set up to the point where this particular company fleeces franchisees of the money to set up new franchise locations and then pretty much sets them up for failure to the point where they just take back the franchise from the franchisee. And hey presto, they've got themselves a new location and somebody else has fronted the money. It's franchise business as usual, though. McDonald's is like that too. Yeah. Franchises in this day and age, they are quite predatory. 30, 40 years ago might not have been so bad. Well, these days especially, it's just all it is big companies taking advantage of the little guy and then stealing a business out from under them that they've fronted so much money for. There are some franchises that, depending on which one you go with, you're pretty much buying a job. I know one in particular, Chick-fil-A, is like that. Now, granted, there are some advantages to having the owner there and having it their full-time job because it helps to keep the quality up. But still, as a business, if I'm putting a business owner hat on, if I have to be there all the time, it's not a business, it's a job. I bought myself a job. Kind of self-defeating at that point. Unless, of course, you really like good fried chicken sandwiches. Chick-fil-A has a different franchise model. It benefits both the company and the franchisee as well. Yeah, in a sense, I don't like the idea that that it becomes a full-time job. If I own a business and it requires my presence constantly, I bought myself a job. And I don't want that. I want something that requires as minimal a presence as possible. This is the broken social contract stream. That's sort of what it's turning into, isn't it?
Here is actually a great example of this happening. These two family marts are literally about 20 meters apart from each other, and while these stores are fighting for survival over the same customers, the Family Mart brand itself is happily collecting royalties from both. This kind of brutal competition, where even the parent companies are working against you, often ends with people in these stores working themselves to death. And when I say death, I mean that literally.
The amount of work these convenience store workers have...
There's a term for that in Japanese. It's called karoshi, which means death from overwork. And it is a real thing in Japan, has been for a long time. And it is a social problem that they almost refuse to address.
To go through is no joke, as for example, there was a story recently of a 38-year-old convenience worker from Oita who worked 6 months straight and then died from karoshi, death from overwork.
Why the people in the conveni have to keep competing so hard for these customers today is because in the last few years the Japanese economy has been a total shit show. In fact, the situation here is so bad right now that some economists genuinely believe Japan is about to crash so hard they might take the entire world economy with them.
That, you know what? That could be quite possible. Look, it's really ironic. We see all of this, and then we watch the charts for like the Nikkei. Nikkei's at all-time highs. In fact, I think they have, if you just go off of the numbers from the Nikkei, they have pretty much recovered from the crash in the late 80s, early 90s when the bubble economy popped. So all of the mediocre performance and the losses from the lost decades, they have technically recovered all of that. And yet, inflation's at an all-time high. Japanese yen is not worth shit compared to the dollar, the pound, or other countries' currencies. And on top of all that, you've got serious declines in the native population. You've got an over-tourism problem. And it's just, it's rough. It's rough no matter where you go.
But for the average Japanese person on the street, this macroeconomic disaster situation simply means one thing. They are broke. Every day, the yen is becoming weaker and weaker, and people really have started rethinking their spending habits.
There was a time where 100 yen was almost exactly equal to $1. It wasn't that long ago, in fact. It was just a few years ago. But since then, we've seen that it takes 140, 150 yen now to equal $1. That's quite a decline. And especially in such a short period of time, that's a lot of pain to deal with in a short time frame. That translates into a lot of pain economically. And yes, it does mean that a lot of people are now broke and they can't afford a lot of the things that they used to. It's great if you're a tourist. That means that your local currency, be it dollars, pounds, euros, whatever, go a lot farther in Japan. But any business that is so dependent on tourism money, that in and of itself is not really sustainable and can oftentimes be subject to wild economic swings.
While prices have gone up, the amount of money people make on average hasn't changed in 30 years, which is why to many that old idea of paying a little extra for the convenience now feels like a rip-off.
Even though convenience stores are still very much, well, convenient, due to the increased inflation, people simply aren't willing to pay for that increased premium like they used to.
Unfortunately though, the frustration that the average citizen in Japan is feeling right now isn't aimed at those who might actually deserve it, such as the politicians or the big corporations squeezing everything they can out of people, but instead to the minimum wage workers just trying to make their ends meet.
なんでみんなスタッフ頭使わないよ。頭覚えて言ってること。頭。
Hey arsehole, why don't you get the fuck out? As a matter of fact, why don't you fuck all the way off back to where you came from?
覚えて言ってること。なんで
This customer harassment problem, known in Japan as Kasuhara, has been ingrained to the culture for decades thanks to the customer is always right thinking. However, recently the problem has become so prevalent all around the country that the government has started heavily campaigning against it, which is why now everywhere you go, you will come across flyers reminding customers to not forget that the people working in these establishments are human beings just like them. Now,
It's the Japanese version of what you see in Western airports. Only that one's even more aggressive, basically saying not only will harassment not be tolerated, you could be subject to arrest. This is the lighter version of that. At least with this, you're not subject to arrest. Seriously, what kind of jerk-ass has to behave like unruly animals? Foreigners who have been kept under lockdown due to a global pandemic for well over a year, and then they finally get a taste of freedom, and they go absolutely mad. And that's really only scratching the surface of it. There are some cultures that are just so objectively inferior to others that the people coming from those cultures know only how to behave like unruly animals, as you say.
Now, you might understand that when you combine these crazy customers who harass the staff with the recent changes, such as the convenience store shutting down their usual facilities, you start getting scenes like this viral video where a woman who was denied from using the bathroom started going nuts and fighting with the staff about it, eventually forcing
I think these are Chinese tourists. They're also some of the worst, by the way, chat. Incredibly rude.
herself behind the counter, where, naturally, she did what any logical person would do in this situation
Oh my
and
God.
started shitting on the floor.
So here we are. Things in the Japanese convenience stores have
Chinese
in many
tourists.
places turned literally to shit, and the industry is struggling more than ever before. Now the big question is, can the conveni be saved? And the answer to that is sadly no. At least
It's an absolutely disgusting meme, yeah.
not in the way that we know them today.
To find out what convenience stores might look like in the future, I visited Takanawa Gateway's Lawson of the Future, which is a recently opened experimental store that acts as a living proof of concept for how automation might just save the industry. The store is filled to the brim with technology, as Lawson is aiming to reduce human workload by 30% in the next few years by creating robots that can handle most of the physical tasks required to run the store. Inside, you'll find interactive shelves that track exactly what you pick up, cashiers working from home remotely through anime avatars, and in a
Vtubers.
typical Japanese fashion, cute robots to keep you company.
ためになりましたよね。
From a business perspective, it's easy to see that this kind of technology might be the solution to keep the convenience stores alive in the future, since the robots don't get tired, nor do they need a visa like the migrants, and they certainly don't get depressed when a customer screams at them and shits on the floor.
But just because something makes sense for business doesn't mean we aren't losing an important part of Japan.
For 50 years, the conveni was more than just a store. To many of us, it was a lighthouse in the dark. No matter where you were or how late it was, you could always count on the fact that just around the corner there was a Family Mart ready to take you in and help you fill your pockets with famichiki and beer.
So let's enjoy the
Yeah, and without that human element behind the counter, that whole experience is not going to be as warm as it used to be. Doesn't matter if you've got Vtubers as working at self-checkout stands. Something's lost there.
conveni while we can, because we might be the last generation to see it.
Alrighty. We'll give that a like. Such is the time until they start employing someone with a whip to contain problem parasites, yeah.